So today I want to make a video about this article from the Financial Post, and it's titled "Alberta is facing a full-blown economic crisis and it needs support, not condescension." So I'll read a little bit about it, and we'll talk about it then. It starts off by saying Western Canada is currently facing uncertain times not witnessed since the Petro-Canada Centre, better known as the Red Square, was built to house the Red Crown Corporation downtown Calgary in 1983, and with no resolution in sight for the 5-year-long rout in oil and natural gas prices, things are going to get a whole lot worse before they get better. While on Canada's decision to move its headquarters to Denver made headlines, the reality is that business is leaving the province in droves. One local realtor, Robert Graham at Aerostar, told Global News recently that Aerostar alone has helped 100 Western Canadian companies relocate to the Houston area, 40 of those in the past year and a half. And that is a stat that's absolutely staggering, because that just goes to show just how bad things are getting in Alberta. I mean, it's in Canada as a whole. The difference is that the rest of Canada is just more of a welfare state, as far as their equalization goes, and within the province. So Alberta is more of a free market, blue collar area. So when things get bad, they kind of get bad, and it's something that we need to figure this out. And the problem is that the federal government, at least while they're being run by Liberals, or provincial governments while they're being run by NDP or Liberals, aren't going to do anything to help us. They'll say just enough to keep people from getting too upset from threatening to leave, or to threaten to leave, but they won't do enough to actually fix the problem, because if they actually fix the problem, it'll prove them wrong, because they have this idea that oil is terrible, and climate change is this big issue, and they're completely, I mean, like I said in other videos, they're completely ignoring that we have to get oil regardless. And the problem is that people who talk about renewables as being the solution, renewables are not the solution right now. The technology is not nearly good enough to even come close to competing with oil and gas. Oil and gas is literally probably hundreds of times better. It's way cheaper. It's way more efficient. It's you guaranteed to have it, because in much of Alberta, especially the northern part, it's not very windy and it's not very sunny. Like, I believe Edmonton is one of the least sunny cities on at least in the first world on Earth, aside from like your Stockholms and places in like Sweden and Finland that are way up north. So renewables in Alberta are not the answer. It costs way too much, and the technology is not nearly good enough, and not nearly enough. I mean, a ton of money has been pumped into it, and it's still not good enough. So the people that say, well, there's just not enough money being put into it, but that's complete BS. There's billions of dollars pumped into trying to advance renewable technologies every year, and it's the technology's literally gotten minuscule amounts better. So again, it's not the answer. And the other thing too is that oil and gas isn't that bad. Climate change is largely an overblown issue. In my estimates, I'd say it's maybe 10% as bad as what the Justin Trudeau's of the world would have you believe. And I mean, I don't want to talk too much about climate change, because that'll get me going forever. But I've made other videos about it before, and like I said, you can go check out people like Patrick Moore talks about it a lot. Tony Heller is a guy on YouTube you can go check out. They basically go on to say that the whole climate change thesis has been largely overblown. They've lied about data. They've been caught lying about data. Like, if you're talking to people about climate change and you ask them, well, what's something that would get you to change your mind on the topic? One of the first things that should come up is climate scientists being caught lying and manipulating data, and they've done that. You can just search up the ClimateGate emails on that. So I'm not going to talk more about that, because that's another video in and of itself. But let's keep reading more of the article. Others are shutting up shop completely or closing locations in the province. Chile's shut all but 3 of its Alberta locations in 2017. Red Robin's plans to pull out of Alberta by the year end. Starbucks has also announced numerous closures in both Edmonton and Calgary. That on top of the multitude of mom and pop businesses that are going out of business. Um, in total, we calculate business insolvencies in Alberta have skyrocketed by more than 70% from their 2015 lows as compared to 13.5% decrease on average for the country as a whole over the same period. Here in Calgary, the mood is outright abysmal, with 89% of businesses saying that the current economic situation has deteriorated since last summer, according to the city's annual satisfaction survey. And that is a staggering survey. 89%, let's just round it up, 90%, 9 out of 10 businesses saying that the current economic situation has deteriorated since last summer. And there's no denying, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, that the federal government's neglect of Alberta and Quebec's neglect of Alberta as well, has had a impact on that. So in my mind, why in the world, I mean, there's already a lot of people, but why in the world are more people not beating the drums for seceding from Canada? Like, I don't understand it for the life of me. Alberta gives. I seen a stat the other day that one of the people I follow on social media posted from Stats Canada, and they found that Alberta generates between provincial, federal, and royalties, all that stuff, about $50 billion in revenue, and of that, Alberta actually only gets back about $28 billion. So in other words, Alberta is losing out on about $22 billion in almost as much as as much as it uses a year in revenue. If we succeeded, well, guess what? All of that money would be ours. So it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Like, imagine if we had an extra $22 billion a year to invest in ourselves, how good the economy would get. And all of a sudden we could afford the things that we're currently spending money on. That's the one thing that the left could be happy with, is that at least in the time being, maybe they could keep their free health care, maybe they could keep all their government goodies and all this crap. But that's something that it just boggles my mind, like how, I don't want to say dumb, because most of the people that are against it are just are people that they're just brainwashed mainstream media watchers that have no idea what they're talking about. But adding it all up, at the end of 2018, Alberta's real GDP was 1% below what it was in 2014, and 6% lower on a per capita basis, according to ATB Financial. And it isn't looking much better with what could be negative GDP growth in 2019, according to the Conference Board of Canada. In fact, recent Conference Board studies show that Edmonton and Calgary will post the weakest economic performance among the 13 major Canadian cities this year. The result has been job losses, and a ton of them, sending unemployment rates in Calgary and Edmonton north of 7%, well above the Canadian average of 5.5. However, this really doesn't tell you how dire it is for many Albertans, as we calculate that personal insolvencies are up 28% from their 2014 lows as compared to a 15% decrease for Canada over the same period. Again, in Alberta, we are getting screwed in every way we possibly can. It boggles my mind how anyone from Alberta cannot be at least very open to the idea of secession, at least very open to the idea of getting rid of equalization payments. Alberta loses, I think it's $12 billion a year in equalization payments. There is nothing technically there kind of is, but there's nothing that saying that we can't just stop paying that. I mean, what is the federal government going to do? Like, they have more to lose than we do. It makes absolutely no sense. And again, I don't understand it. And like I said, it's mostly mainstream media and your public schools manipulating people into believing what they believe, which is a whole nother issue in and of itself. But let's keep going on here. Some economists are still citing our historically above average per capita income levels. Consider this, 1 in 4 people using food banks in Alberta is employed or recently employed, the highest level in the country. And the one thing I would point out about that is that when the NDP came in, they added a ton of government jobs or public sector jobs, and adding jobs is good, but the problem with those is a lot of those are unsustainable, in that a lot of the people working those jobs, the jobs don't have to be done, and when when the when we finally go belly up, basically, I guess would be the best way of putting it, those jobs are going to be gone in the blink of in a heartbeat, and those people are all going to be out on their butts, and since they're public sector employees, they more than likely don't have any education and or realistic work experience. If they do have an education, it's more than likely in some BS, arts degree or some crap like that that doesn't really have a lot of use in a free market. So I would say that again, the whole 1 in 4 people using food banks in Alberta is employed or recently employed, that's a pretty staggering amount, and I think that kind of debunks that other idea. I'm not going to read any more of the article. Like I said, just look up Financial Post Alberta. I mean, you can look up the title here. I'll pull it back up. But Alberta, like I said, and like I think it's beyond obvious to anyone, we're having a lot of trouble, and until we figure out that we're getting the short end of the stick, and we're not going to stop getting the short end of the stick until we stand up and say enough, then it's going to keep going like this. That, I mean, in my personal experiences, and I think this is pretty much everyone, more people than you know are having a hard time with things. And like I said, doing what we, again, it's like I would point out, is that I don't think it's the official definition, but the unofficial definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And that's what we're doing in Alberta. We're doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. The only way things are going to change is if we stand up to the federal government and to these far left, I mean most of the time far left or left policies, and say enough's enough. It's not working. We need to do something different. And the problem is that the left kind of has a monopoly on a lot of these things. That's why, part of the reason why things haven't changed. We're kind of screwed with our oil situation. I mean, the federal government does whatever they can to block pipelines and block more energy sector expansion. The BC government's run by the NDP, so they do whatever they can to block it. Quebec has got their heads so far up their butts, they're not going to listen to us. Ontario is currently conservative, but I wouldn't say for long. And then you got Manitoba and Saskatchewan. I mean, Saskatchewan's pretty good, but they're like us, they're landlocked, so they can't do anything. I haven't heard much more about the TMX, which the one that's supposed to go down to the U.S. I assume the Trump government, I'm pretty sure they've approved it, but I believe the Trudeau government may be doing whatever they can to block it. I haven't heard much more on that, but we got to get these pipelines built, and we got to start expanding our oil sector and oil and gas sector. And if we don't do that, well, Alberta's going to be in a lot of trouble. And the leftists that claim, well, we should diversify. Well, number one, we don't need to diversify. Oil and gas is still, for the next 50 to 100 years, probably even more, still the future. Like I said before, and I keep having to say it, renewables are not the future. Like I've said before, Germany has the most renewable energy out of any country in the world, I believe. And one coal power plant could make up for all that energy, is the first thing. And the other thing, too, is that it's a regular basis. And number one, they lose money on putting that stuff in, so you're losing money. And the other thing, too, is that you're losing money even after you have them in, because it's not always windy and it's not always sunny. And sometimes it's windy and sunny. And what happens is the battery technology is so bad that it goes back, you put it back on the grid. But the problem with that is you're losing money. You can't make money off it. So that's basically, to sum it up, Albertans, for the people that aren't upset, which it should be a tiny minority of people, but at the very least, we need to have a vote on equalization payments, because Quebec is completely about as arrogant and disrespectful as they possibly can be to Alberta, and yet we're giving them $12 billion a year and we got nothing. Alberta hasn't got $1 in equalization payments over the last 10 years, and Quebec's gotten over $100 billion. $100 billion. Like, that's just an insane number. And like, again, this stuff is, I think you talk to people about this kind of stuff, and the numbers are so staggering that they think in their head, well, that can't be the case. Things can't be that messed up, like, because in their minds they're not paying attention to things, and they're thinking that if things were that bad, they would find out about it. But in reality, they're just doing a good job of not paying attention to it, and when they do pay attention or try to pay attention to it, they're watching the mainstream media, which is as biased as can possibly be. And since they're mostly federal, where they're going to support the Liberals and the NDP, and they've gotten a massive bailout from the Trudeau government, so of course they're going to support them. So, again, thinking you're going to get an unbiased view on the mainstream media is like, it'd be like if it'd be the exact same thing as if big oil was paying me to make these videos. It'd be the exact same thing, because the liberal governments are completely against all this kind of stuff. They pay the mainstream media. Therefore, how in the world can you expect to get an unbiased view? I mean, the definition of conflict of interest is if you're being paid by one side and not the other. But I've talked quite a bit about this issue, so I'm going to leave it here. If you like the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more.